Welcome to the Filmlings Podcast,
a weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is Week 19, Maternal Meyers.
And today we're welcoming a guest, Andrea Millard, to the podcast.
Hey guys.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good.
It's super great to have you on the podcast. And as our audience knows, we typically let the guest pick the topic for the week. So do you want to describe a little bit about why you picked Nancy Meyers? I know we were excited to do our first female director on the podcast.
Yeah.
We plan to get more into the works as we go on.
Yeah.
But what is your personal connection with Meyers movies?
So I just grew up with Nancy Meyers. I used to make my babysitter watch The Parent Trap with me like all the time. So and I just really admire her as a writer and director. And I love rom-coms. I'm a sucker for rom-coms, and she kind of shaped a lot of those. I think I've seen What Women Want, like, I don't know, hundreds of times. So, but yeah, she made What Women Want, The Parent Trap, The Intern. She's done a lot of her work. She's kind of like a tag team force with her husband, Charles Shire, and they usually co-write together, and it wasn't until after they divorced that she still continued writing and directing on her own. But she's just a big inspiration to me as a kind of strong female writer-director. That's why I like her. Yeah,
and she definitely makes well-loved, well-regarded films.
Yeah, they just feel good.
that are just really fun to watch. And it's been a nice turnaround to get into the groove with like The Parent Trap and The Intern after we've just spent 2 weeks in this weird surrealist realm. To just like come back to a nice little bit of adventure set in a sane world,
right?
Or a more sane world, one that follows the laws of physics. Let me put it that way.
Yeah. I don't think we've had this much kind of feel-good movies in one podcast since maybe Toy Story, but I'm kind of bringing it back to Pride and Prejudice when we had our classic rom-coms earlier in the podcast.
Yeah, really old, like 18th century rom-coms.
Right. Well, then you throw in zombies and it gets a little updated.
Fair enough.
I actually did think about the 2003 Pride and Prejudice a lot this week because we're kind of getting back to that, 90s, 2000s with Parent Trap and a little earlier with Baby Boom.
Yeah. Actually, I've been thinking about that Steve Jobs biography this week with The Intern. I feel like Nancy Meyers read that and then wrote this movie, which is possible because the lead Anne Hathaway's character in the movie, Jules, acts a lot like Steve Jobs, except she's not a jerk. She's like a nice Steve Jobs in that movie. But anyway, it should be a really fun week to talk about. It's always a blast to have 3 people on the podcast instead of 2. Not that me and Jonathan are having fights. We're not, but
they won't.
It's a lot. It's just not fun to like share it with even more people directly. But do you want to dive a little bit more into Nancy Meyers' biography itself and set us up for the films?
Sure. Okay. Well, she started out in public television in Philadelphia, and it wasn't until later on she was 23, or she was 22, and she had moved to LA with her sister, and then she was really inspired by the Mary Tyler Moore Show, which is known for the like strong female character, and
seems very fitting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then she teamed up with Charles Shire, which she married. And so one of Nancy Meyers' early films was Baby Boom in 1987. And it kind of echoed her life at the time. Like, starting out in a new marriage, dealing with
She had just had her first child right
Yeah.
before that too, hadn't she?
Yeah. And it was just and it's also like her first attempt at being a writer, and she didn't direct Baby Boom. She was just the writer producer, and her husband Charles Shire directed it, and it is about a career woman who then is basically subjected to being a mother whenever
Literally has a child thrust upon her.
Yeah.
literally a child is thrown into her hands because it was her inheritance from some
Right.
long lost cousin.
The most
just goes to
the most
show,
ridiculous
kids,
MacGuffin ever.
read things before you sign them.
Yeah, I love how who would do that? She literally signs a paper without even realizing what she's inheriting. And it happens to be a baby. So she's given this baby and has to and it's all the hijinks that go into place when.
We'll get into all that in a second. And then, so we skip a little bit to kind of mid-career and pick up with The Parent Trap, which probably most people will be familiar with, from 1998, a remake of The Parent Trap in the 60s. And this is her first time actually directing a film. So she co-wrote the re-adaptation or whatever, modernization, I guess. And
The Lohanization.
yeah, it says introducing Lindsay Lohan, so I guess this was Lindsay Lohan's first movie. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, both Lindsay Lohan and Lindsay Lohan. Yeah.
Lindsay Lohan featuring Lindsay Lohan. And,
Shocking amount of Lindsay Lohan in this movie.
And Alex, what's the last movie we're talking about this week?
And then finally, we're going to talk about The Intern from 2015, a delightful movie. And it's her most recent work. It's another writer-director credit again, which definitely puts her into the auteur category of what we talk about on this podcast, having so much creative control over a film. And those people are always interesting to talk about. So I'm excited to get into this this week. And with that, let's jump into the individual breakdowns.
All right, so the first movie that we're going to talk about is Baby Boom, and this is pretty simple concept.
Pretty 80s.
If ridiculous. Yeah, so our main character, J.C. Wyatt, is a working businesswoman, pretty well respected in her company. They do businessy marketing stuff. It's not all that important. The point is she works a lot, she works hard, well respected. And then one night, in the middle of the night, she gets a phone call that her distant cousin, someone or another, the parents died in a car accident, and she's the only relative living to take custody of their child. And so she doesn't get that information in the phone call. She just knows that she's getting an inheritance, and she ends up obtaining this child, and now all of a sudden she has to manage raising an adorable little girl and keeping up with her fast-paced working woman lifestyle in New York, and all kind of the shenanigans that go along with that. There's work politics as far as her perception as a woman and as a woman with a family, and then we get into some culture clashing when she decides to move to the country and ends up starting her own baby food business, and then it all comes back full circle when her old company wants to buy her new company, and she has to make a decision on what the priorities in her life are.
Dun dun dun.
And the interesting thing is that for this movie, this is the first time that we're kind of trying to focus exclusively on the script, because Nancy Meyers only wrote it, she didn't direct it. So as this will be mostly a discussion about the story and the way it was written, rather than some of the specific techniques in the film.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting look, and it definitely helps set up and define a lot of the issues and themes and viewpoints that Nancy Meyers likes to wrap up in each of her movies and tackle or at least present in each of the stories that she tells.
Yeah, that's one of the things as far as auteurs that we talked about, like you mentioned, is that they all tend to have kind of this this running theme or a running bag of themes that they like to come at from different angles with different movies, and we're definitely seeing that with these three films, and it starts here with Baby Boom for sure.
Yeah, it's almost like you get to look into the auteurs' personal problems a little bit and see what they tackle in each of their movies. Not that I'm saying that every auteur puts out their personal baggage on screen. Obviously they don't, but if somebody keeps coming back to something over and over, you think at least the idea of that is important to them.
It resonates with them.
Yeah, like how Quentin Tarantino definitely cusses all the time. There's no way that guy doesn't cuss all the time. So definitely, something that I think weighs heavily or has played a prominent role in Nancy Meyers' career as a filmmaker has been what is the role of women in the workplace, and not even like what is the role, but like how do they reach an equal standing in the workplace, and how are they
perceived?
Yeah,
how are they perceived, and even more so, I feel like especially in Baby Boom, but then later again you see it. That's the theme of The Intern, is striking a work-life balance. Like, how do you balance all the things that you want to do in life? And it's fortunate for all of her protagonists, because all of her protagonists are super rich. So
yeah, that helps.
They definitely have problems, but we get to see definitely a certain aspect of those problems with all these rich people.
It's about having it all. I mean, they set that up in the very beginning of the script. That it's like, can you balance? Is it possible to balance it all?
Oh yeah, that voiceover.
And
oh yeah, the voiceover. I would have loved if that was diegetic.
Right. So we start the movie with this kind of monologue over a montage of women walking quickly in New York in business clothes. This I don't even remember exactly how it goes, but do y'all
Shoulder
remember?
pads.
yeah, it's about women, and they can achieve whatever they want. They could be a doctor now if they want, and it's like
Yeah,
it's
the modern woman.
Especially focusing in on that.
Specifically, I feel like 1980s.
Yeah, on that generation.
Go get 'em, girls.
Yeah, and then it goes a little farther and describes JC as the tiger lady, the lady who has it all.
Oh yeah, because it starts out like, now take this woman for example. I'm like, okay, so here we go.
Yeah. So focusing in on our main character.
As far as the writing, that's kind of what we see throughout this film, and this is one of her early works, and I think it shows a lot in the way that what the film wants us to know is told to us almost directly by the characters. So it gets its point across, but without as much like work on our part to understand it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that goes to how easy it is to watch a Nancy Meyers movie. They're built to sit back and enjoy. They're built to just kind of let them roll in front of your eyes, and then by the end you realize, oh, there were some bigger themes in play there, and they snuck up on you over the course. It may be, and I think they're definitely more prevalent in Baby Boom, but I think they get subtler and subtler as we see her career advance, as she grows as a writer and a director, from The Parent Trap to The Intern.
Yeah, I agree. I think that that it's very direct in Baby Boom. The characters are so bold that they state exactly what they. I feel like you can tell where every plot point is occurring because they literally say it out loud.
Yeah, yeah. When her boss is like, you have a daughter now. Do you think you'll be able to handle all the stuff that you're doing? I'm like, okay.
I wonder what the problem could be here.
Right. And then this movie like tries to handle a lot of different things, and I think that's another thing that we'll see get better, is that she can handle multiple themes, but in this one I at least I didn't feel like they kind of meshed as well. We throw a bunch of montages together just to kind of get us from one place to another, and we're tackling themes of changing from city life to country life, learning how to be a mom, learning how to balance family and work and stuff. And so we're kind of jumping back and forth, and some themes would be more prevalent sometimes and less other times. And by the end, I wasn't sure which was supposed to have the focus for the entire film.
I feel like all of the montages, I mean, they were all steps to her accepting that motherhood in like this quiet place was like good and even possibly better than just being at the top of her career, because she's already reached the top. So yeah. But I do feel like by the end it's like it doesn't quite have the satisfaction you want out of it.
Maybe the struggle didn't feel as hard to make that decision.
Right. I mean, I feel like there's something in just that it's so like go, go, go. They don't take the moments to like slow down and really feel what's happening always.
Yeah, and they did a little bit. Like at the beginning, I really liked the sequence of her and her boyfriend, trying to learn how to deal with a baby and figure out how the baby works, because they only interact with adults. How the baby works. I mean, honestly,
how does this little human function?
Honestly, that was the conflict.
I mean, that's a fair point.
Yeah, that was such a sweet like sequence of events and stuff, and then I felt like once she kind of left her job, then the learning how to be with the daughter and spending time with the daughter got a little bit fell by the wayside as she started doing other things, and the baby was just there for it. I don't know. I just was like so enraptured in this moment of her bonding with the baby that I wanted more of it. I don't know.
Yeah. A lot of, the decision at the end felt, it almost felt too easy to make. Like does that make sense?
That's the other thing, is that, she tells us at the end that she wants to stay home and be able to have her daughter and kind of work around her life as a mother. But we didn't see as much of it as I would have liked. Like I would have liked to see some of those. And we got a couple, but, in her closing monologue, she talks about how she likes having a crib and a mobile in her office and just working and having the baby right there. I was like, that would have been a nice thing for us to have seen throughout the course of the movie,
Yeah. For sure, it would have been a little nicer to dive into those moments. But another thing that I wanted to bring up about this film is kind of that weird cultural distance that we have from 2017, and we experienced this a lot back on the John Hughes Week, where we were looking back at a lot of films set in the 80s, and I feel like we always talk about this with 80s films.
We've done a lot of 80s on the podcast. I was noticing that.
Yeah, well, because I think it's because our parents' generation grew up then, and so the 80s are kind of the it thing. If you have a retro party, it's a retro 80s party.
Yeah, and that was like the Brat Pack time, the film school brats and stuff like that. So there was a lot of good content coming out at that time.
Yeah, blockbusters were booming and all that jazz. And it feels like a decade that really, really likes itself. So movies set in the 80s are very 80s. With even this movie opens up with like synth music.
Well, but I don't know that when these movies were being made, they were like, we have to highlight the culture of right now. It just was the style of the time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's what I mean. Like, I feel like the decade style of 80s movies has just seeped into the production much
Of
more
all
than you
80s
see. Yeah,
movies.
than you see like in a movie made in the 90s or a movie made back in like the 50s. And I think the same argument could probably be made for the 60s and 70s that they like themselves a lot. But back to this cultural distance that I was talking about, the idea of a successful single woman with a baby is not foreign to us, or not even really that alarming. Like there's definitely still some taboos surrounding it. There's definitely some prejudice surrounding it. But if we hear that is someone's situation, it is in no way shocking to
Right.
us, I don't think. But back in 1987, I'm making it sound like it was 200 years ago, but it wasn't. Like back in 1987, when dinosaurs roamed the earth. No, but back
Mullets. Back when mullets roamed to the earth.
there you go. That is terrifying. But back in 1987, like that was still, I think, definitely still on the leading edge of representing a strong single woman with a baby. Like I think that was still pretty new in cinemas and a pretty relatively fresh cultural idea to base a movie around. So it definitely is. It doesn't feel as bold as now as I think it did back then, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And what you were saying, like, it ties back to like the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Right, where it's this woman working in a workplace. She's dominated by men. I mean, literally in the movie at the beginning when that comment that was made, that was like, I don't see you as a woman or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she just sort of embraces being that.
I see you as a generic blur because I haven't updated my glasses prescription in 25 years.
Right. Yeah, and I don't know what the corporate environment is like, and so I couldn't exactly tell if some of those character portrayals were stereotypes or if that's exactly what happened at that time period as far as women's perception. Like her boss anyway, seemed really nice and sweet, but he kept on saying all these really awkward things.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of under the table sexism. Like it's not overt, but it's still
and
present.
It wasn't it didn't feel intentional either.
It just felt like it felt like a cultural thing.
Just kind of subtle condescension of, oh, are you sure you're gonna be able to handle this?
Yeah, exactly.
We didn't talk about the romance. Do we want to bring up the romance? Am I the only one that felt it was really awkward?
I feel like that, because I don't know. I feel that the Vermont stuff, like that montage of her going through all the struggles of dealing with rural life. She's a city woman dealing with rural life, and she can't handle it. I feel like that's all necessary because she's now going through the process of regretting her decision. But the fact that, it's cute, but I feel like the fact that a romance is kind of one of the reasons she's staying kind of detracts from the relationship of the baby and the mom.
I do like that they ended with the baby and the mom, though. The last shot of the movie, the last scene of the movie when she comes home after rejecting the buyout offer, she greets her love interest, and then she goes and sees the baby.
Right.
And kind of stays with the baby at the end.
Yeah, but the romance in general, like you said, Andrea, it detracts, and like we were talking about earlier, it felt like just another element that was trying to cover way too much. I almost wish that the love story would have been background, oh, she met this guy and they like to hang out sometimes, but that's not because that did sort of take over the story at some point, and it just didn't do much for me, really. It didn't
Yeah.
seem necessary to the stuff that they had been setting up at the beginning, because at the beginning they were kind of setting her up as this woman who could handle a baby without a man. And I mean, it's fine if she has that relationship. It just didn't feel like that's what the movie wanted to be about. I don't know.
Right. It felt like almost like a box on a checklist that had to be marked for, quote, having it all.
Right.
It's true.
And I don't want to, but I kind of, as we're talking about this, thinking back to Eraserhead, because some of those themes overlap. I know we don't want to talk about Eraserhead, especially like that's such a weird tonal comparison, but I mean it's almost the sane version of an unexpected parent learning to deal with a child, and
Yeah. At least this
she
child
actually
doesn't
kind of
look like a weird, creepy E.T. baby.
well, that's true.
I think something to note about Baby Boom is Diane Keaton and her performance. It's really interesting in a lot of Nancy Meyers films. Diane Keaton is within them. She's in that, and she's in Baby Boom, and she's also in Something's Gotta Give. And it's interesting because she looks very similar to Meyers herself, and it reinforces this idea that Meyers is reflecting on her own life within her films, whether it's subconsciously or consciously. And it just goes to show that hiring an actress that looks like you, whether you do that consciously or unconsciously, reinforces that idea. And though I would think that Meyers chose Keaton primarily for her comedic chops, because her performance is so funny and so earnest and stuff, and it's kind of theatrical. Like she has this bigness about her, and I think there's a bigness about all of Meyers' characters that's really fun to watch. Like when when Diane Keaton has a monologue with the plumber in Vermont, how she can't handle rural life and taking care of her vacation home. It's just too expensive, and she can't handle it, and she goes like so nuts about it that it literally causes her to faint. And though that may be a exaggeration, that it's interesting because it's so big, and you get to be in this screwball comedy world.
All right, so let's move on to the
Lindsay
Parent
Lohan.
Trap. Yes, Lindsay Lohan and more Lindsay Lohan in the Parent Trap. So I want to set that up first.
Yeah, I can set it up. All right, so the Parent Trap.
As if people don't know what the Parent Trap is
Yeah.
about, but we'll,
I'm pretty sure
we'll
you're
explain
aware.
it.
In case you don't know.
Based off of the 1961 movie, I think that's what it was. So, The Parent Trap is about two twins, Annie and Howie, who were separated at birth and then meet at a camp just by destiny. And then they discover that they are actually identical twins and decide they want to get their parents back together, and then go through a bunch of twins hijinks to do it.
Yep. They meet at the camp through the power of screenwriting.
Yep.
Yeah, and I do want to get something out of the way at the start of this breakdown. And this is a really enjoyable film to watch. It's fun to watch. It's endearing. It's heartwarming. I love it. But let me just say, the custody decision that these parents reach sounds both illegal, not properly executed, and monstrous. It's not even like they like got into a fight or like somebody beat the other one. No, they just didn't get along. So they separate, and one of them just takes a baby, and they're like, "Well, we're never going to introduce you to your sibling. That's not going to happen ever. You're going to have to be a single child now," and that just seems so incredibly wrong to me.
Yeah, and it's not like, like one was put up for adoption or they were both put up for adoption, so they live with different families. It was like, no, you're still living with your actual parent. We're just never going to
We're never
interact with
going
each other.
Not
Just-
even like a phone call.
Yeah.
I mean, it is the 90s.
Just because, quote, right? Like you have phone
the
technology.
to do this.
This isn't the 1890s, guys. Come on. Well, they could send a telegraph then, even.
Yeah.
See, you have no excuse,
No excuse.
And
not even
they
1890s.
send faxes in this movie, which is kind of like a telegraph.
right? And I mean, and the reasoning behind it is just basically, to quote the parents, he drove me crazy. That's why
Yeah,
they
that
don't
is the
talk to
only-
each other. That's why they don't introduce their kids to each other. And that doesn't play too much of a role. Like the kids don't seem that upset about the decision. The parents don't seem that upset about it. No, none of the supporting
Everyone's-
characters seem that upset about it. They seem surprisingly okay with it.
Yeah, they're pretty chill.
Oh,
They're like,
yeah.
oh yeah, we're related.
That was, we were never going to introduce
That's the
you to
thing.
your sibling. That's cool. But I just wanted to get that off my chest that I think that's terribly wrong. And if you can come up with a reason that it's not morally wrong, feel free to tweet it at me. But I will argue with you.
Yeah, but there's not a lot as far as that kind of stuff that we can, especially fault Nancy Meyers for, because that's what we're talking about this week.
Oh, yeah, no, not at
Because
all.
this is built off of an existing story, so that's where we're coming at from this one. Is it's already a beloved classic that's now being re-updated, and unfortunately I did not get a chance to go back and watch the original. I haven't seen it in a long time, so I don't know exactly which points were changed, but we know that those kind of basic things are the same, and we want to focus on, in this case, Nancy Meyers' direction through this.
Yeah.
She has been noted to be very particular about how she directs, and she takes a lot of time. She takes a lot of angles and time getting the shots, lots of takes. And I think that's a sign of somebody who truly cares, and it's certainly a good reminder to me, as somebody who may kind of lack a bit of confidence, that she really trusts herself and wants to make sure she gets it right. Because as she says, she's looking for something. So she takes enough takes till she gets it.
I know because I was watching the behind the scenes stuff, and it just seems like it'd be super fun to be on this set. Like everyone's very engaging, and like they kept the atmosphere light to sort of create the same kind of environment that you see on the screen. Everyone's just like it just
Like
seems
the proverbial family
Yeah.
that everyone is part of.
yeah.
Yeah.
And she just, I don't know, Nancy Meyers seems like a really fun person to work with. on set.
Yeah, we'll include a link to some of that stuff on YouTube in the description. But you're right, it is like Lindsay Lohan was kind of interacting with her in the same way she interacted with her mom and stuff. So it's like, it really was just kind of a big familial, fun time atmosphere.
Yeah, and that definitely leads into the tone of the film, which is chock full of hijinks and pranks to start off with and to end with, whether or not it's pranks at camp or pranks on the would-be evil stepmother. And that actually almost becomes the main tool of the twins to affect change in their life is hijinks.
Yeah, and we like bring it full circle where we start at camp having kind of, cabin wars or whatever, with the two girls pulling pranks on each other. And then at the end of the movie, we go kind of full circle where the two girls and their dad and the dad's love interest, Cruella DeVille, as they call her in the movie, they all go camping, and then they pull a bunch of pranks on the love interest to get her to leave. So we're kind of like, that's definitely a through line, and it's just a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, which just makes for really solid writing and character building. There's a lot of setup and payoff in like really small ways in Nancy Meyers movies, where things that characters do later in the film have been hinted at or done earlier in the movie, so it doesn't seem super out of character. Like when you see the butler come on the trip towards the midpoint of the film, when the parents come to meet each other again, and he's dressed in a super cool way, it doesn't seem shocking because you've seen him do the really cool, fun, hip handshake with.
He's not like a stuffy. He's not Alfred.
Yeah. It's not you see Alfred stride out in a freaking leather jacket, which it would be funny, but it would be really random. It's just little things like that, or like setting up the pranks in the beginning, which is a really fun way to get into the movie, and it's a really good fun way to end the movie and bring it around full circle and make it feel connected. Especially in a film where you're jumping locations like Nancy Meyers likes to do. Like in Baby Boom, it takes place both in the city and in like Vermont. And in Parent Trap, it takes place all over the world.
Yeah, we're in 2 different continents in this movie.
Yeah, it takes place in California, some random camp in
the East Coast,
London, and then I think that's it. Do they go anywhere else in this movie?
I don't think so.
I don't think so, yeah.
But in The Intern, there's both New York and San Francisco. Taking trips seems to be a big factor in Nancy Meyers movies. She seems to like to make people take trips.
Yeah, I think. Well, she really I think she really appreciates. She really appreciates architecture, housing, and nature, kind of all together, and how they complement each other. So
yeah, it's a really solid way to get some iconic images into a movie.
Yeah.
Too, like along with the fact that the distance between the characters and where those parents chose to live means something about their relationship, and the difficulty in bringing the family back together, across that big of a distance. It also like kind of is nice to be like, hey, we can go to London and we can show Big Ben and we can show the London Eye and all these really cool things in London, as well as, we can go to California and show some really cool California scenery too.
And also something signature about her is this idea about architecture. And it's not just the architecture itself, like this is something she likes, but she really believes that it reflects upon the character. She's the type of director who will make sure all the books in a bookcase are something that that character that's in the shot would read if it's that character's home. She cares about that stuff. It's almost like she sees this character. It's almost kind of novel-like to me, how she really creates this world from the ground up, including building the houses when necessary. She creates the world for the characters. And to put that into a visual form is pretty cool, I think. So that's something I feel like you can take away from her style, is that the interior design, the houses, architecture are all a reflection of the characters themselves.
Yeah, and I think that that's part of the reason why this movie fits so well in Nancy Meyers' canon. Because like we said, she didn't come up with the story, but it hits a lot of the points that, like we were saying, her autorial, canon of themes. So we have the mom, who is a fashion designer in London, single mom with a daughter, which hits on same things from Baby Boom and The Intern. And then, yeah, like you were saying, the use of architecture and the really nice houses and the kind of upper middle class characters all kind of fall into the same wheelhouse that Nancy Meyers basically has built her career on.
Yeah, she has I feel like she goes into escapism, and that's, I feel like, part of the joy in watching her movies. You can kind of live like these characters do, in these nice houses who have this beautiful lifestyle. And I also wanted to mention, because the decision to make like Hallie from Napa Valley and then Annie from the UK was a conscious decision, because it wasn't like a big difference, I think, in the original Parent Trap as far as the two twins, but it really helps kind of separate the two characters, not only like logistically making it like one more thing that's difficult is that they're separated by location, but they're also it really helps, I feel like, identifying them as characters on the screen, not just, because one literally talks with a British accent.
Yeah,
right.
So that
Yeah.
really helps.
It helps you keep track of them.
But I also feel like they have pretty distinct characters. Like Annie's very neat and tidy,
Yeah.
and Hallie's very kind of like a cool girl.
And I want
Are
to
you saying
say,
being neat and tidy isn't cool?
No, it is cool. I like Annie. She's kind of my fave. But
one other thing we want to bring up, because I think this is, a good time to bring in more film theory and stuff like that, is the Bechdel test. Does anyone want to explain that real quick?
Sure. So the Bechdel test kind of developed as a way to kind of just, it's a litmus test for a film to see whether or not it has a decent representation of female characters. And this isn't like to say whether or not, or the specific way in which female characters are depicted, but just like their presence in the film. Are they really, really present in the film? Because the Bechdel test is pretty simple. It's whether or not two female characters in a film have a conversation about anything that is not a man. So if it's just two female characters have a conversation in a movie, but it's about a guy, doesn't count. It doesn't pass the Bechdel test. And you'd be shocked. It's a vast majority of movies that don't pass the Bechdel test. And when you describe it, it seems like such a simple goal to hit. And it's really weird that it's not hit regularly, like all the time.
Right.
And that's kind of how it's become more prevalent over the past decade or so. And there's blogs about it, there's podcasts about it, there's all sorts of stuff about it, and it's become a big part of film theory. But it is an interesting thing to look at this week with a female director who's also the writer, who has basically complete creative control over the movie, and see whether or not these films pass the Bechdel test. And I feel like in The Parent Trap, we can say with certainty, yes.
Yeah, that's the most clear passing the bar, because we have the whole first half of the movie is the two sisters at camp, and they don't talk about any male characters at all except for the dad once they figure out who they are. So yeah, this one passes it with flying colors.
Right. And I think both Baby Boom and The Intern pass it. But like they skirt by in that it's the main character talking to kind of like a side character, or not part of the main cast, but a side character in the office, typically giving them orders, because both lead female roles in both films are successful businesswomen. So that's their Bechdel passing conversation, is whether it's, hey, get those reports on my desk, or hey, did you set up that meeting? If you count that as a conversation, and there might be more specific details about it depending on how in depth you want to go about what counts as a conversation and what doesn't. But I think both of them do, but they don't have as strong of a pass as The Parent Trap does.
Right.
yeah, the female characters are more like underlings. Yeah, like you said, like get these on my desk or fill this on my schedule. They're not really directly related to the main plot.
Yeah, and actually a way that the intern probably could have passed stronger is if they had made Anne Hathaway's mom like a real character. But we can get into that in a second. And the other thing I was going to say about that, as far as Nancy Meyers films, is, a lot of films you kind of have to like talk about what it's about, because Nancy Meyers films are often about females, relationship to men, and it's kind of addressing that. So we can see where that comes into play, but there's still a lot of ways that films can incorporate female interaction that is kind of just interaction for its own sake. And if it sounds kind of harsh to be like, well, why do you have to have that? If you think about how many movies are about men just, interacting with men and not involving a woman at all, it's like there's a big out of whack proportion kind of a thing. Not saying that every film has to have one or the other, but the amount of films that don't have two female characters interacting outside of a male character is kind of way out of proportion.
Yeah, it just seems so weird because it seems like such an easy mark to hit. But it's not. It's almost always missed. So we can do better, y'all. Anyway. Yeah. But we did want to bring that up because it's an interesting piece of film theory that's been circulating around for the past 10 years. It's been a big part of a lot of film studies. And with our first female director on the show, we wanted to take the time to kind of delve into it and present it as an idea that maybe you can use whenever you're watching a movie and that's something that interests you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and another really cool thing about this movie is, just how well the compositing VFX hold up compared to the time they came out from 1997 or 1998. Sorry, when The Parent Trap came out. It's been almost 20 years, and it's pretty seamless to have two Lindsay Lohans in a scene together.
Yeah. Basically, it was I forget her name. Her name's like Ellie Mackey, who was the body double for Lindsay Lohan, and they had to. It had to be super planned as far as they had a motion control where it was they had to record one sequence of Lindsay Lohan doing the action as Hallie, and then go and do the same exact camera motions again, and then lock it on both ends, and that took a lot of coordination, and they had the DP's pretty cool. He's been on a lot of big stuff like Back to the Future and Jurassic Park and stuff, and he used that kind of technology in The Parent Trap. So
the reason that's impressive is in the original, and like I said, I don't remember it too much, but typically if you're doing that kind of mirroring effect, what you do is you kind of lock the camera down into one shot and split it in half. And so you have one actress on one side and the other on the other one, and then when you're editing, you cut each one in half and meld them together. But you can't have the camera move around a lot or the two halves won't match up. So now we have this technology where you can have a jib, which is a big arm with the camera on it, do a move, and then basically keep the program of how that move went and do the exact same thing twice. And so that just helps integrate the camera into this doubled shot, and it helps sell the effect better. And it works really well. I didn't even notice it.
Yeah, and I don't think most people look at The Parent Trap and think, oh, that was a big VFX movie.
Right.
But 1998, that's almost the prime time of practical and CGI mixing together. You've got The Matrix coming out in the next year, which kind of had a lot of evolutions of CG and stuff like that. It was prime Jurassic Park time. It was right before the Lord of the Rings movies. So that's this big VFX boom is starting to happen, and you don't think Nancy Meyers and you think there's a VFX director, but she pulls it off really well in this movie.
That's her first directorial attempt too.
which is hell of impressive, and that's awesome. And I don't think she's done any other movies with a lot of VFX involved.
No, I mean, I think that was definitely like the big one. The other ones are more like this. Yeah, I mean, I just feel like all of it was just a pretty big production in The Parent Trap.
Yeah, and it was just kind of like, so it was kind of like a side effect of the specific movie itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like VFX isn't necessarily Nancy Meyers' style, but she was able to seamlessly incorporate it into her style for telling this movie, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and another point about how like this is actually a pretty big production, especially like we were saying as her first directorial debut, is that there's one fencing scene in at the camp where the two girls are fencing off against each other, which is actually a pretty genius reveal because they both have the masks on and they're fighting, which sets up the fighting that they do right after that, and sparring back and forth, but they don't know that it's them. But they got friggin' Bob Anderson, the sword master from everything from Star Wars and The Lord of the Rings and Zorro and The Princess Bride, to be their fencing consultant on this film, which is kind of amazing.
It is. I love
That's
that
my
fencing
bit.
scene.
Yeah.
Do what?
Yeah.
I said I love that fencing scene.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, you watch it and it's like a sword fight, like, from Star Wars or whatever.
It's pretty
and so
epic.
They didn't jip on anything, even though it is a lighthearted, fun family film.
Yeah, and it still has emotional, tense undertone to it. You don't lose any tension from the scene to just watch a really fancy sword fight, because the question is, whether or not they're going to realize who each other is related to the other one. At what point is this coming? Because you know it going into the movie. It's pretty obvious. It's not a twist that's hid from anybody, unless you just don't know what movie's coming on TV right now, and it happens to be The Parent Trap.
In the middle of a fencing scene.
In the middle of a fencing scene. So you just you're already watching for when are they going to realize that they're twins. So that's what's happening this entire scene, and you just have that added excitement of a sword fight going on.
Such a wonderful
it works really
payoff.
well together. And then at the end, they look at each other and they're like, "Oh my gosh, we look exactly the same, almost like twins, except I hate you, so you can't be my twin." Which really should have been like a dead giveaway that they were siblings, but.
And the interesting thing is that, like, when I was watching it this week, I didn't realize that the poker scene comes immediately after the fencing scene. I think I remember both of those scenes like distinctly, and I didn't know that they followed immediately after each other. So, but it kind of gives each girl a one-up. So, I don't remember which is which, or I guess the British girl wins the fencing match, and then the girl from California wins the poker match. So we kind of set them off at the beginning as equals on different levels, and then they just have to keep trying to one up each other.
I don't know. I feel like Hallie's definitely a meaner prankster than Annie, but
I can't remember which name associates with which girl.
Hallie's the one that did the big prank at the end where you have all that production design. That's really awesome in the camp, inside the cabin, where it's
She turned the entire cabin into a booby trap and ended up soaking the camp director.
Home Aloned it.
Yeah. Home Aloned up the cabin.
And that, goes back to, the production design and the use of locations and mixing nature and architecture and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. All right, and that will bring us to our last movie for this week, The Intern.
Yeah, so The Intern is Meyers' most recent film from 2015, which she wrote and directed again. So we're looking at the complete spectrum of her career again, all the way from Baby Boom to The Intern.
Without the help of Charles Shire this time.
Without the help of Charles Shire this time, exactly. So The Intern is about a 70-year-old man, played by Robert De Niro, who has retired, his wife's dead, he doesn't have a lot going on, and he is kind of going crazy in retirement, having nothing to do. So he enrolls for a senior internship program with a fashion company that was started by Anne Hathaway's character, Jules, who is on top of it, except not quite as on top of it as she would like to be, business owner. I don't know if she's technically the CEO, but she started this company's business, and she's definitely in charge currently.
Top dog, yeah.
She's top dog. She founded it a year ago in her kitchen, as they keep talking about throughout the film. And
it's a nice kitchen.
It's a nice kitchen. What can we say? Again, they're rich people. But Robert De Niro becomes her personal intern, and they don't mesh very well at first, but over the course of the film, they end up, or Robert De Niro really helps Anne Hathaway out. He's kind of a helper / a mentee / a confidant / a best friend.
/ Mary Poppins.
He's what you, and I've heard different names for this kind of character before. But essentially Anne Hathaway's character has like the emotional arc over the course of the movie. And the real struggles. But Robert De Niro's character is still really fun to watch, and it's fun to watch the effect he has on the people around him, as his it feels mean to say elderly wisdom, but it is elderly wisdom.
Well,
that he's
what's
Just
that
say
archetype? The sage or something?
the sage, but the character type that I'm referring, or the protagonist type that I'm referring to, is what you either call, I've heard it called the hero character, I've heard it called the Jesus character, but essentially they don't have much of an arc because they're already pretty awesome. So the fun of the movie is watching their effect on the people around them, and
passive protagonist,
kind of
also.
like that, yeah.
Well, yeah, I think passive protagonist is one that doesn't have an effect on the story, and he does have an effect on the story. The story doesn't have much of an effect on him, I guess.
Yeah. So it's just, I'd have to go dig through some old film school textbooks, which I don't feel like doing. But it's an interesting character type to watch because it doesn't happen very often, because it's very hard to pull off. Because typically you need that emotional core to connect with. A very relatable character who's struggling and having difficulties and overcomes them. And I think that's handled really beautifully in this film with kind of like this two-handed effect of Robert De Niro's character and Jules, played by Anne Hathaway. Because Jules is the one who's having all the struggles. On the surface, she seems to have a really busy but really good life. But, everything is kind of falling apart at the seams. The venture capitalist who invested in her firm, in her sales company, her fashion company, are looking to hire a CEO to oversee her, which she's not thrilled about. She's having a hard time staying on the top of all of her responsibilities at the company. Her home life she's not involved in it as as she would like to be. As we find out later in the movie, it's kind of falling apart more than we would think. But Robert De Niro's character comes in and kind of helps her out, which creates a really interesting, fascinating duality between the two of them as leads.
I like how so as far as it comes like full circle in Nancy Meyers' life, we start with, in Baby Boom, with this woman in the 1980s, sort of like, sort of when Nancy Meyers was at the beginning of her career, and then it's like we get the perspective of the working woman after Nancy Meyers is like towards, I wouldn't say the end of her career. I mean, I hope she still makes movies, but
yeah,
right.
the end so far. Yeah, the most recent.
Yeah.
No, yeah, and I can see kind of there's a lot of parallels with Baby Boom and Nancy Meyers. Like, you almost think of Nancy Meyers as getting closer to the stage of Robert De Niro's character, and then she also brings in Anne Hathaway, which is kind of a modernized version of the same character in Baby Boom. So it's a little bit tackling some of those same themes and bringing it into the current day, and also getting to infuse some of her viewpoints on life as she's a little bit older now. So it's an interesting mix, and it works really well. Like this movie tries to tackle a lot of things too, but it felt a lot more cohesive to me than Baby Boom did, as far as what it was trying to tackle and how those things relate to each other, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think exactly. I'd have to agree. I think like she's in the stage where she can be more reflective about it all, and it's more. I feel, for lack of a better word, well-rounded than.
Yeah.
It's there's more leniency in the characters in the intern than there is. It's pretty like in your face in Baby Boom.
Right, and yeah, like so some of the things that the intern handles are, how older people want to fill their time and still be involved in the world and not just feel like they're done with most of their life and they have nothing to do anymore, but still want to be productive members of society. Like Robert De Niro wants to get a job. And then it also tackles, the differences between younger people and older people. And there's some really funny moments as far as, Robert De Niro brings his briefcase that he bought in the 50s to work. And one of the guys sitting next to him goes, "Hey, where'd you get that vintage case? It looks great." And then later buys it on eBay. I thought that was that's so funny, that idea of a millennial who's interested in all of these vintage and retro things, like meeting someone who used them when they were brand spanking new and were the new technology and stuff. I thought that was a really interesting look. And then also different, it tackles kind of the changing perspectives of manhood as well as womanhood, almost more than womanhood in this one, I think.
Oh yeah. I mean, Anne Hathaway's character has a big speech that's really interesting. Well, let me preface this by saying she was drunk and getting drunker over the course of the speech. She kept doing shots. But she was talking about how kind of like how Baby Boom set up its story by defining a generation of women. In Anne Hathaway's or Jules's speech, she says they were like the generation of "You Go Girl," I think is what she says.
Yeah.
And maybe not that men had been left behind, but maybe not as nurtured, and they're struggling to find their place. And while we've gone from calling women girls to calling women women, we've gone from calling guys men to calling guys boys.
Yeah.
Which is just kind of like a really interesting thought to be thrown out in a movie that seems to be all about this working woman's balancing act of her personal life and her job.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I don't know, that seems really interesting, and I'm kind of curious what your perspective is, like, as being guys, if that was, like, insulting to watch.
No, I don't think so. I think it's a thing that guys have noticed too. This kind of generation of men who expect a lot of things and are almost allergic to responsibility in a way. And a lot of movies have kind of riffed on it as like a comedic thing, like the man boy who never really grew up and just has like.
There's lots of man babies out there.
Not to name names, but any Adam Sandler movie. But I mean, like, you laugh because you know exactly what I'm talking about. I think that's kind of what this movie was trying to address in a more mature way, is that there's a generation of men that kind of had a more concrete idea of what being a man was, and now those men maybe didn't set an expectation in the same way. So our generation is a little, or those expectations were made much more lenient, and that was taken advantage of by the next generation who kind of just expected things more than knew that they were expected to work for them.
And I feel like it varies. I feel like there's pockets of people who feel this way about it and pockets of people who feel that way about it. And you're definitely not going to get a grand consensus from anybody. But I feel like we've definitely said this before on films, on this podcast. But the point of movies is not always to offer a solution, but to pose a really interesting question.
Yeah, it's like it's ideas that you're spouting out throughout like the story. And
Yeah,
I feel like
and offer like a take on that question along with it, which is exactly what happened in this movie. Is this is a problem, this is a question, and what do we, and at least this specific speech, and like how do we tackle it?
Right, and that's a smaller example. Like that's not a huge focus of the movie, but there is another focus that I don't know how specific we want to be about it, but it made me think a lot when the movie was over.
Yeah, because it doesn't make a complete amount of sense to us, especially compared to the decision that was made at the end of Baby Boom.
That was another thing, is that it almost feels like the opposite conclusion was reached.
Yeah, it's more of it's definitely more nuanced. And I think there's a lot that goes into it, and I think a big part of it was her becoming more aware of the problems, and it's a lot of little things, like learning how to communicate better, learning how to have a confidant that'll help, that'll help you out and you can rely on. And learning when to draw the line and say, no, I don't need somebody to help me with this. I'm the best person. Picking which responsibilities
which is
need
a
to
fine
be,
line.
Yeah, like picking which responsibilities need to be yours and which can and should be delegated. Because that's, it's a big gray area. It's a big tightrope walk to run a company like that. At least from what we've described in this, what we've seen described in this film. So that the answer almost resists simplicity, because if you present a simple answer, then you automatically have a counter argument to it.
And you can't say that one solution applies to every situation either. So
exactly, which is if compared to how this movie would have been done by an unexperienced director who had just had the script come down the line from a studio.
Or a younger writer.
It would not have been handled in a nuanced way that shows this kind of experience and complexity that goes into the problems and the solutions of the situation.
And I think like we can actually see that with Baby Boom. Like you mentioned, a less experienced director or a younger writer. I think that's exactly, if you put Baby Boom and the Intern back to back, that's kind of what it is. It's Baby Boom is like, all right, I have a point of view. I need to tell people what it is. And then the Intern is like, okay, this is a situation that people go through and it's not black and white. So how can we kind of show that? And I think that's an interesting thing to look at, these two kind of bookends to Nancy Meyers' career at this point.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about the presentation of millennials?
How can we not talk about presentation of millennials?
As millennials?
There's a pretty broad spectrum of millennials, I feel like. From her kind of like assistant who's like really on it and stuff like that, to the other interns that are like, one of them, like I feel like, because the Redbeard guy, like he's
I called him Captain Redbeard in my head.
He's like,
he like still lives with his parents. They're about to kick him out of his house and stuff.
I don't want to say selfish millennial, but that the man boy.
He's used to being taken care of.
Yeah.
And he doesn't know how to take care of himself. And there's the one who's played by Adam Devine, who is a total fuckboy. He is. And he cheats on on Jules' assistant early in the film, and that kind of helps set up that there's going to be an adultery arc later in the movie.
Does he cheat on her, or is it just that he was hanging out with her and then he started dating, or he then slept with her roommate
without knowing.
without knowing it was her.
Oh, yeah.
So it's kind of more like a comedy of errors.
Well,
Yeah,
but
kind
if
of,
he
but,
was
I mean,
dating
it's-
her,
But yeah,
I think
it was still, it's just, yeah.
Yeah, it affects the same thing. It's a big gray area, but
well,
but
yeah.
it kind of helps set it up. But anyway, the point is, he's a slightly different kind of millennial, and then there's Andrew Rannells, who's more of like a tech-focused millennial. It seems like that's his niche, and he's all into hip hop and stuff, and he's fascinated by the vintage.
Well, yeah. Then there was that other guy
with the glasses.
Yeah, with the dark beard. He
we'll call him
was
dark beard.
definitely the hipster
Yeah.
one who was definitely into like craft coffee and probably smokes a pipe or something.
Yeah, and the office is all like open layout. It's all sleekly designed. They have a company
Very
masseuse
white with lots of
who goes
like,
around and gives people massages.
and other things.
Well, just for her love interest, Robert De Niro.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I mean, even Jules like rides around the office on a bike, which just seems unnecessary.
It's
but
basically a Pinterest office.
It's awesome. I want to
Yeah.
ride a bike around.
Yeah,
No, it is really cool, and it definitely appeals to our demographic, specifically.
It is a quintessential millennial office, but at the same time, it's nice to see a quintessential millennial office where everyone is like working their asses off, and it's not just a bunch of people messing around all the time, which is kind of typically the satire you see of a millennial office, which is everybody's playing ping pong, everybody's
Drinking.
riding around on
partying.
hoverboards.
And the other thing is that I was a little worried going into the movie, because when a film deals this specifically with the younger age group and wants to kind of paint them as the millennial generation, it can get really stereotypy and like really awkwardly like out of touch as far as the dialogue and the writing and stuff like that. But it wasn't that bad. It was not as bad as I was expecting. There were a couple moments where like a character would say "be there or be square" and like sounded dead serious about it. And I was like, I don't know about that. But for the most part, like they seemed like real people.
Yeah, they weren't just a collection of stereotypes, which made it more fun to watch, to see Robert De Niro interact with them, and it made the clash of old and new more interesting.
Yeah, and we kind of described them as a collection of stereotypes, but they really felt more real than just those types. Or I guess maybe our generation has just stereotyped ourselves way too much.
I feel like because I think in the dialogue it doesn't really focus on slang and stuff like that. It really just focuses on, common problems that millennials deal with, like lack of being able to communicate with, like Adam Devine not being able to actually communicate with a girl in person. He's like, I texted her all these times and I emailed her.
I sent her an email, but like a really nice email.
Yeah, he sent her an email with like an emoji, but he didn't actually like the worst way you can communicate about something that's actually serious.
Yeah, that's a good point. And maybe that is where the difference is with other movies that focus on millennials, is that like they try to show that they're focusing on millennials by just throwing in all the slang, and it never comes out right. So kind of toning that down and just focusing on the interactions really helps.
That heist scene, I feel like that was probably my favorite scene of the whole movie. I don't know.
That was pretty
Yeah,
great.
so at some point, Anne Hathaway's character accidentally sends an email ranting about her mom that she was going to send to one of her coworkers. She sends to her mom, and she sends Robert De Niro and 3 of the other guys from the office to break into her mom's house and delete the email off of her computer. And
They almost get caught by the police. And
right. It's ridiculous and a lot of fun.
yeah, and this whole movie, even though it gets pretty serious and there's some big problems at the end, remains kind of like this a really fun movie to watch, a really enjoyable movie to watch. I don't want to toss around the word romp, but it can get kind of rompy in places.
Yeah, it kind of was at the beginning, and then once it started dealing with deeper issues, it really toned itself down, which I didn't really know what to expect going into this movie, but I expected it to be just a straight romp of Robert De Niro not knowing how to do technology and
I was terrified that was what it was going to be.
Right, and it wasn't, which is definitely a good thing, and again is one of those things that sets it apart from other movies that deal with, the older generation mixing with the younger generation. Is it wasn't just like terrible techno slapstick of Robert De Niro not knowing what Google is or something dumb like that.
What are you going to do with all these Twitters and these Instagrams and
right? That's
these
mostly the comedy you see
chats.
when you mix the millennial generation and the elderly.
Yeah, I think they have like one gag about that where he's sitting down at his new desk and he can't turn on his MacBook. And he just looks over at the guy next to him who smiles and then taps his space bar, and then Robert De Niro figures it out and taps his space bar. So they get it in because, that definitely is a factor.
But it felt real and not...
But it felt real, yeah.
Yeah, over the top. And there were, another thing as far as movies that deal with millennials is you kind of have to get the technology right for millennials to believe it. And for the most part, they did. I think there were two things that kind of bugged me about the way they did the technology. One was the fact that Anne Hathaway will talk to her mom on speakerphone and be typing at the same time, and her phone clicking sounds would her mom would hear them and be like, "Are you multitasking while you're talking to me?" And it happened twice. I'm like, you just turn the keyboard sounds off. I don't know how many people actually use their keyboards
on.
Yeah, they're so annoying.
Only people Robert De Niro's age keep the keyboard sounds on.
And the other thing was the perfect Skype call. I hate it when Skype calls.
I agree. I was like, wow, this quality is so great for Skype.
It was perfectly lit and perfectly encoded. And especially while you're in the car driving, you're going to have
on a mobile Wi-Fi connection. Yeah, it's gonna be bad.
But other than that, it was fine. But when you're making a movie that deals with our generation, if you don't get the tech right, you're gonna lose the audience that you're shooting for.
Yeah.
All right, so now let's get into overall notes. And as usual, we've already started to cover some of these themes that span all three of the movies. But I mean, we really can see a growth in her writing from Baby Boom through The Intern, and in her directing between The Parent Trap and The Intern, which is, the bookends to her directing career as well. So far. I'm sure there will be more Nancy Meyers movies. But it is definitely nice to see that kind of growth over a writer-director's career, over an auteur's career.
Yeah, we see the maturity of perspective from her sort of starting out as a mom and as a filmmaker into somebody much more rounded in perspective, but still also reinforcing the same ideas.
Yeah, in like we were saying, a more nuanced and mature way. And we did already talk about kind of the fact that these all deal with characters that are pretty successful or come from middle upper class lifestyle, which you were saying is kind of escapism, and it lets us live into that world, which is true. But also, I think the people who are kind of close to that social strata can probably identify most with these and with the things that are dealt with, like especially in The Intern with the millennial generation. I think all three of us have seen each of those millennials at some point in our life, and interacted with them, because that is kind of our generation.
And also, the themes and the problems that Nancy Meyers likes to tackle tend to be more prevalent once you get up to, or once you look at people in the upper middle class region. When the problem you're worrying about is work-life balance and not how am I going to eat tomorrow. You've gotten out of like this survival mode, this panic mode, and now you're wondering about these other bigger thoughts about life. Like, can I afford, or not even can I afford, do I want to take time off work? Because I can take time off work to spend more time with my family. Not, I don't have a choice, I need to feed my kids, let me stop working. And I'm not saying there's anything lesser about these movies. I'm just saying that that just lends itself to this storytelling and these themes, to stay within that kind of range, that demographic.
About her aesthetic, it's very, everything's very well lit, and there's not really any shadows. She actually wants all the shadows taken out, and you see that especially in The Intern. And that kind of, she's very inspired by the 1930s and 40s, and so that her aesthetic reflects that. And I think that's something that's really cool to note about Nancy Meyers, is she wants her worlds to be, because these people aren't suffering. They have established themselves, they have careers and stuff. Not that their problems aren't significant, but that it kind of softens things when everything is just still nice looking. Not that you don't feel the sad moments, because you do, and that's what's great about it. Like, you can feel these sad moments, but still walk away with kind of a happy feeling, a hopeful feeling. I think the kind of feeling you walk away with when you watch a Nancy Meyers film is optimism. And that's kind of nice, especially in today's market, which is very cynical. And there's reasons to be cynical. I'm not saying that that isn't valid, but watching these movies again gives you that sense of optimism from the past and stuff. And I think that's something she encourages and embraces. And that's kind of cool.
And but also just, I feel like the themes of parenting and growing up and motherhood, like, that's something universal that a lot of people can relate to.
Everyone has a mom.
Yeah.
Unless you're Batman.
Unless you're Batman.
And hopefully you called her a couple days ago, because it was Mother's Day. We did not plan for these movies, mostly about kind of mother-child relationships, to happen right after Mother's Day, but hey,
it does. It just happens.
Works out. And one thing you mentioned in your notes, Andrea, is a lot of these movies seem to be coming from personal experience, which probably more a sense of her own feeling of not knowing what she's doing as a parent, which I think all parents kind of go through. But it's just kind of funny that they're all, except for The Intern, I guess. Anne Hathaway was pretty solid as a mom, if maybe overworked. But in Baby Boom and The Parent Trap, as we were talking about with The Parent Trap, their terrible custody decision, and then
so
in Baby Boom, when she gets the baby, it just flings it around everywhere.
Yeah.
How's that baby alive? She really should. It looked like it should have slipped and fell on the New York sidewalk.
This baby like it's like a bag, like a designer bag or something.
Like a baguette under her arm.
Yeah. Yeah, like sideways, and
yeah.
It's pretty alarming. But yeah, I just feel like at the beginning, but I think that's kind of like, if you think of that progression and you think of Nancy Meyers' life, like, it starts out where there's so much chaos in being a mom, and you don't really know what you're doing, and you maybe make a lot of mistakes along the way, and then at the end, though, like with The Intern, she's this really like solid mother who can, like, she's overworked, but she's still, I feel like, she's pretty solid mom.
Yeah. She hasn't,
Yeah.
she's not ignoring her daughter at all.
When she's home, she's like in mom mode. So
Right. There were some really sweet scenes, just hanging out with their family and stuff.
yeah,
Oh yeah, the kid was adorable.
yeah. The kid in the intern is just she's a ham, but she's really cute. I think it's really interesting about like what makes like a good this archetype of like the villain woman and then the good woman, like all the it's interesting that just in general like Meredith in The Parent Trap is a villain because she's like this young she's beautiful and she's kind of on top of her game as far as business, but she doesn't know how to be a mom, and that sort of makes her a villain.
And she has no,
But she's also a terrible person.
I mean,
Yeah,
but I mean, I think the big thing that makes her terrible is like she's really just after Nick for his money.
I mean, her announced plan is to gold dig the husband.
Yeah.
And then kick off the children to like boarding school in Switzerland.
Her and her parents have literally a evil laugh moment about that.
Yeah.
Where she's what does she say? The parents are like, well, if you think it's a good choice, like, well, there's a lot of good reasons in the bank or something, and they all go. But yeah, I guess that's the only one with a female antagonist, unless you want to count Anne Hathaway's mom, which I don't think.
Yeah, she's like peripheral.
I mean,
she just seemed like normal mom that Anne Hathaway was just annoyed with, not necessarily out to get her.
I mean, is the antagonist in the first one the baby? For
no,
like maybe a little bit, and then it's like the patriarchy?
Yeah, I think it was her boss more.
Or all the dudes at work.
Yeah, it's her boss and James Spader's this young adult male who's just like rising up, taking over her sort of established. She's this established woman, and she's sort of like the only one there, and all that work is being butted out by a young boy, basically. So.
Yeah. So what do we have coming up next week, Jonathan?
So next week we are going back to our old friend, the Samurai and Sombreros, with Volume 3, and we'll be talking about Rashomon, which is an early Kurosawa film, and The Outrage from 1964. Rashomon is 1950. And The Outrage should be interesting. It has Paul Newman in it, and William Shatner's in there too. I haven't really heard much of The Outrage. It seems to have kind of fallen by the wayside. But Rashomon is definitely up there in Akira Kurosawa's canon, so it should be fun to compare the two. And also, it's interesting that The Outrage came out the same year as A Fistful of Dollars.
Also true. Yeah. Installation number 3 of Samurais and Sombreros. So make sure to come back next week to check that out. But that's about all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us or just want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Garinger.
And I'm at AJ_the Tarsier.
And to find links to things that we talked about today, you can view them on the blog at thefilmlings.wordpress.com.
If you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes so other people will know what we're all about.
We definitely appreciate it.
Talk to you next week.
All right. Thanks for being on the show, Andrea.
Yay! It was fun.
Corgi! Oh my god, it's so cute. There's a corgi in the complex. Look at its little butt.